and see what happens. Still getting used to all the Zoom stuff. Oh, I think we are live. Here we go, we are live. And we'll just wait for a couple of minutes for people to join in. I'm still getting used to modern technology, Norm.
Yes, well, I know what you mean.
Some things I'm really good at, and some things I kind of am less so.
It says live on Facebook.
Yes, we are live now, and we're getting a few people joining us, so we'll just wait a few seconds and before we officially start. But that's looking good. Norm, can I zoom in and see what books you've got there in the cupboard?
Yeah, go for your life.
No, I can't. And we'll talk about that mural you've got at the background there too later on. Well, I think we've got enough people to kind of start, and people are going to be looking back on these anyway later, hopefully, if they're interested. So we'll begin. Hello and welcome to another SDAQ&A, where we're welcoming today Dr. Norm Young. Hey, Norm.
G'day, Peter. How you doing?
I'm very good. It's good to see you. We seem to randomly bump into each other around Kurrambong or Bunnings or takeaways or Coles, don't we?
Well, not at the moment. I'm fairly
happy. Prior to the isolation.
Yes, indeed.
So it's nice to kind of bump into you here on Zoom and to have a chat. It's the 40th anniversary of Glacier View, and some people celebrate the anniversary and some people wish it was forgotten. But you were quite involved with Glacier View. For people that have that are young people and kind of have heard ruminations and hushed tones spoken about it and don't really know what it is, can you just give a quick summary of what is Glacier View? What was the event Glacier View? And then we'll talk about leading up to it and post Glacier View.
Well, it was triggered by a forum presentation in October 1979 by Dr. Desmond Ford, in which he presented some of the problems with our investigative judgment and sanctuary doctrine. I never heard him so frank before and so open about all the problems, and I initially was quite shocked and actually wrote to him telling him, oh, boy, you really let it rip. But years later, when I read the script again, I kind of quite amazed that I was admonished him at all. It's
interesting.
But at the time, I think I've never heard Des so open about the problem. The problems were not new to me, but because I was taught by Des, and he did ventilate some of them with us, and some of them we discovered just by reading our Bibles. But Neil Wilson, who was the GC president at the time, he thought the way to handle this was give Des 6 months study leave, which he did, I think, in Washington, D.C., and produced quite a hefty manuscript that went through about 6 points and really reflected the problems he raised in the forum. That is the Adventist Forum, that was where it was in PUC in the USA. I think Wilson made a huge mistake by doing that, personally, on reflection. At the time, of course, this kind of thing at this level of the church I was totally naive about it all. The ramifications and the machinations and all the rest of the politics. I was like a lamb to the slaughter in some ways, but I mercifully was not the lamb. Des was. And I think he was probably about as naive as I was. In that time, in that 6 months he had, and he wrote this huge manuscript, it really, something that could have been handled, I think. It's like the boy in the dike. The earlier you plug the hole, the better. So the earlier that they talked to Des would have been better. But having this great gathering, because they've gathered at Glacier View in Colorado, very nice spot, mind you, a youth camp, and the facilities where we could sleep. I forget how many, but over 100 academics and administrators there, and we divided up into small groups. I was in group 4, and the questions that we were given to discuss in these small groups were ones that were related to Des's manuscript. And then we gave a report from each one of the groups, and then that came together to the whole group in plenary meeting, I guess, all together in the one meeting. Heard the different groups what they said. Do you need more?
No, that's good. Because I want to go on with that, but that's a good summation of what happened. Was so Neil asked Des to write after the October forum. Neil Wilson asked Des to write his thoughts down on paper, and that was when that 1,000-page book came out. Is that right?
Yes, he was given 6 months.
Right.
And 6 months for Des, he's very productive.
Yeah.
And then he researched it. He did a lot of research and put it all together, and it was a pretty impressive piece of work at the end of it.
Yeah. It's often said that not many people there read it. Did you read it?
I certainly did. I had to wear glasses when I came back, so I put reading that manuscript. Unfortunately, the manuscript that I read was borrowed to reproduce the manuscript so people could get hold of it. And I don't know how they reproduced it, but it went down to a printing press and I guess they scanned it or something. And they got ruined in the process. So I got one of the new printed version, but the one which I'd written notes in, and I read it through, all gone.
Boy, that would have been a valuable document for you to hold up today if you'd had it.
Yeah, well, I have the one that they did in 3 separate volumes, but the one I had, yeah.
So how much time after that?
I definitely did read it. It did take quite a while to read.
And after that 6 months that he'd put that together, how much time was there before that and Glacier View? How much time did you have to kind of read the draft of the manuscript?
Boy, that's a good question. I don't recall exactly, but I can remember my wife and 2 children were in Sweden at the time, and we had just moved into a new home. And I had a little study. I can remember sitting in that study for several weeks. So certainly several weeks, maybe a month. I'm just not sure.
Okay.
It was August yes, it was August that Glacier View met. And certainly I had the manuscript in July, and I can assure you. So yeah, I'd say a month.
Mm. Okay, so before we come now, we're going to come back to Glacier View and some other things surrounding it. But I just wanted to back up a little bit. Were you born a Seventh-day Adventist?
No.
What age did you become an Adventist?
I would have been 23.
Was it because family or girlfriend, or because you were convinced by the doctrinal presentation that someone gave you?
I was in business, and my business partner was going seriously with a Catholic girl. He was, like me, just a secular Oz. though he had attended the Church of Christ, but that was because he was on their basketball side, and attendance was part of the qualifications for that. So he wasn't religious, and I wasn't religious. But his girlfriend he was going with was Catholic faith. And we grabbed one of the guys we did work for who was an Adventist. We used to machine his axles for his trailers that he built and sold. And we asked him, and he invited us to an evening meeting. You can't do it, on the job, so to speak. And we ended up in an evangelist's home. We didn't know that. And the first question he asked us, well, do we believe the Bible? And we said, well, of course not. And said, why not? I'm not sure of the three reasons. I remember there were three, but my guess would be the virgin birth, Noah's flood, and Adam and Eve story.
That's what you offered up.
Yeah, but that would have been some help. I doubt that I don't know whether I knew about Noah's flood story or not. My biblical knowledge was very, very limited. I did do scripture sometimes. It was voluntary at public school. As a public school, I did do the scripture. Whether they ever talked about Noah's flood, I have no idea. I know that I do remember the Good Samaritan story, but I used to get it mixed up with the Simpson and the donkey story from the First World War. There is a certain parallel. So when I had my first Bible studies, it was by page numbers. And, Old Testament is in the front, New Testament's at the back, sort of thing. I still find that helpful, unless you've got the Bible upside down. There would have been some help from my mate who did know a bit more Bible knowledge, but I'd certainly knew about Adam and Eve, and I'm pretty sure I knew about the virgin birth and found that, quite a myth, So they were our reasons. And at the end of that meeting with this evangelist, who didn't tell us he was an evangelist, he said, will you lads come back? We were both in our 20s. And we were too embarrassed to say, no way, Jose. And so we came back. And it gradually led into biblical studies and history. And I was always interested in history. And ultimately, you are confronted with the demands of Christ. And I remember the evangelist saying one night, when he had said to his wife, I learned later, he had said to his wife, we're not going to get either of these two guys. But he said, as we sat down in the lounge, he said, the time to respond to the call of God is not when you say we're ready, but when God calls you, not when you call God. That hit me like a sledgehammer, because that's just what we were doing. We were both pursuing wealth and successful business, etc., etc. And we wanted, when we had our flash car and a big house and a yacht on the Swan River in Perth, then we might. And we used to say, when we see the Sunday laws, we'll join. And that sort of attitude. So when he said that, when God calls you, not when you call God, on the way home that night, I said to my business partner, I'm going to become an Adventist.
Wow.
And he pulled over and he said, you mean not work on Saturday, which we did? And I said, yes. And he said, it won't make any difference to your wages. But he said, the factory will still stay open. And I said, fair enough. And then he said, my only word to you is, if you join this, that you stay with it and not just a flash in the pan. And he himself, of course, stopped attending the Bible studies after that.
So he wasn't convinced.
No, he wasn't. He was a very clever man, and he liked argument, and he was very good at it. And he loved getting a Baptist or something like that and getting stuck into them over the law and the Sabbath. And he knew the text and he could use them very, very cleverly. But when I came back because I went to college, 5 months after becoming an Adventist, and I went back with a lot more conviction that the center of Christianity is actually Christ and not the law and not the Sabbath. And he starts in on that. And I said, no, it's not what it's all about, Steve. It's all about the mercy of God revealed in the death and resurrection of Christ for the forgiveness of sins. And that was too close to the bone. And he never raised the question of religion again.
How you just phrased that is, some would call like the new theology, but this is big new theology influence. Where did you kind of come to that conclusion just from your own Bible study? Because the evangelist wouldn't have told you that, would he?
Well, the evangelist did have a Christ-centeredness, but evangelists do it in a series of steps and went through 27 fundamentals, I guess, in a way. They have a sequence of presentations, gently leading to a decision. But Christ was just one of them in the series. Whereas when I went to college 5 months after becoming an Adventist. I was baptized in 61 in August. In 62, I'm at college. A very green convert, a novice convert. And the only Bible class I had, much to my chagrin, I didn't go to do the theology degree. I went to do Bible. And I had to do a B40 test, which is a glorified IQ test. And so when I fronted up to Dr. Salem on registration day, he said, "Oh, you're a mature age student." "Yes." "Oh," he says, I said, "What do you want to do?" I said, "I want to do the Bible." And he says, "Well, you go into BA theology." I said, "Is that the Bible?" "Yes." "Okay." I had no idea I was doing a degree.
He was herding you into a
and the only Bible
path.
I got was Daniel and Revelation in my first year. And I was, like all mature age students who come to do the Bible, incensed that I only got one Bible and 4 other things. And I said, I don't want Shakespeare. I did Shakespeare in high school. Thank you very much. I've had enough. And, we had some admonitions to belly aching mature age students. And I remember Des Ford saying, if the Bible's the only book you know, you really don't know it. You need a background of literature and so on. Now, all very true. I can now understand from hindsight. But at the time, seeing as I knew precious little about the Bible, it seemed to me a frontal attack, a concentrated attack on the Bible was going to be more fruitful than a circuitous route via Shakespeare.
Yeah.
And so I still remained unhappy that I had to do English and
that was good. It was good advice, but not for someone who is perhaps hungry to just devour the Bible.
Yeah, I've only just, I'm still on page numbers. I wouldn't mind knowing it a bit better. And I thought a frontal attack would be more fruitful. But it was from that D&R class that I started to realize how central Christ was. Des taught it, of course. And I owe Des a huge debt for that. Without in any way casting any aspersions on the evangelist whatsoever. As Paul says in one place, one plants, another waters, but it's God that gives the increase. So in the end, all glory to God, not not the human instruments that we use. But Des certainly helped me to grow dramatically in my understanding of what's the center of Christian faith. So no, not just from my own reading of the Bible. And you'd think DNR, that's not a place, well, you'd just be surprised how Des could get Christ out of all sorts of texts. And there are some where it's pretty obvious, like the stone in Daniel 2 that's cut from the mountainside, just a small boulder, bundi or whatever, hits the great image and makes it all like the chaff of a summer threshing floor. Well, he certainly waxed eloquent about Christ on that. And simple things like the one where it says in one place, Nebuchadnezzar is asking for the interpretation, and the wise men come and he says, well, tell me the dream first and then I'll believe your interpretation. And they said, oh, come on, that's not a fair question of the wise men. Nobody knows what you're not prepared to share except the gods who do not dwell with flesh. And of course, Des said, well, our God became flesh. Mm. And we get an exposition from John 1:14. It's Daniel where we started. And of course, in Revelation, by the time you come to Revelation, it's a revelation of Jesus Christ. So, yeah.
He enjoyed bringing everything back to the focus on Christ.
Very much so.
If there was no Des Ford during that era, because there are hundreds and hundreds of people that will say exactly what you just said, the way he spoke about Jesus, how it was profound and slightly different to what they expected perhaps an Adventist minister to say. If there was no Des Ford, would there have been other people rising up to kind of share that good news or that focus on Jesus?
Well, one would like to think so. He was unique, and he did have a gift of presentation. There were contemporaries, with him, not only at college. I mean, I later learned to respect Alf Jorgensen, deeply. Alwyn Salem made his contribution, so did Russell Crans. Were there others outside the college confines? Well, one that, of course, was in the college conference that made a huge impact on me too was Eric Magnuson. I had him for Introduction to Science, but his was not presenting Christ, but living Christ. The humility of Eric Magnuson was extremely impressive. His knowledge and understanding of science and the ability to present it so that somebody who had no science in his background, I was a fitter and turner, edge person, and I could follow Magnuson. So he had a gift of making profound things simple. I can still remember the propositional logic from Eric Magnuson. The P implies Q and all that stuff. I can still remember that.
Yeah, he was my neighbour, and when we lived on, they called it College Drive back then, didn't they? And he was next door to us, and the Salems were down there, and the Drewers and the Lindsays and the Hokins and the Irvines were all living there on the hill. When I was in junior Sabbath school, he came in and did a little talk for us, and I'll never forget it because he said to me, or he said to everybody, why have you come to Sabbath school today? And everyone chorused, because Jesus and or whatever reasons. And he said, oh, well, why? Because of Jesus. And and eventually a few of us were kind of still involved in the conversation, and I said, oh, because Mummy and Daddy do. And he said, well, why do they come? And I remember as a little, I don't know, how old are you in junior? 7 or 8? I remember thinking, this is blowing my mind. And he then said, always ask the question why. and then he wrapped it up with something, and that really blew my mind. But he did it with real. He was gentle and kind, and
Yeah.
a fun guy as well.
There were people, pastors, like Naden, Pastor Naden. They were gospel preachers, and so there were any number of others who preached the good news of Christ. But Des is the one that had me in the class for a whole year.
Mm-hmm.
And then further on, further classes.
Yeah.
And he was a very impressive and influential person in my life.
Yeah. And I certainly would never think that there'd only be one person that would grasp something like that. I'm just interested to hear what the other contemporaries were. And when you read a lot of Ellen White, you get a lot of the love of Jesus from that too.
Yes.
Why do you think the Adventist Church sometimes dips into a more legalistic kind of format or platform when you have such amazing speakers like you've just mentioned, and a history over 100 years of people that have grasped the gospel and the love of Jesus, including Ellen White? Why is there this constant
I think because of our historical tradition, of course, with the concept of a judgment where every idle word, a misquote of that text, by the way, when you read Matthew 12:36, it's not talking about what we want it to mean. But if you've got every idle word coming into judgments, and soon, nobody knows how soon it'll move from the dead to the living, and your name will come up. That's not calculated to be Christ-centered, is it?
Mm.
And then, of course, our emphasis on the Sabbath makes us a little more law-oriented, I guess. And I'm certainly not against the Ten Commandments, and nor, of course, was Paul, the great champion, I suppose. But we're reading through the Gospels at the moment for our worship, and we just finished John, and I said, well, let's go to Mark. Now we've done Luke, we've done John. Now let's read Mark. And I said to my wife, Mark is probably the first gospel written. It's shorter and it's very quick moving. He won't expand like Matthew does or Luke. And I said, and it's called a gospel because it's the gospel of Jesus Christ. And I said, that's funny that when you think of it, because we don't think of the gospel, we think of always of Paul. But here's Mark writing the gospel of Jesus Christ. I said, goodness me, what a shock. The gospel can be found in the gospel.
Yeah.
And clearly, as we read Mark, we will be reading about the good news about Jesus Christ. It will tell us that in many places in Mark. Not least the one that, says the Son of Man came not to be served, but to serve and give his life in exchange for all others. I mean, if that's not the gospel, God help us.
When you were talking before how you were about 23 and you'd been a fitter and turner, but hearing you talk about the gospel and you've got an incredible mind, if you don't mind me saying so, and but you left school and didn't really pursue any kind of academic advancement at that stage?
Well, it was fairly normal not to when I was a schoolboy. I did 3 years high and doing what they call a junior certificate. Then you had to go on to only a few places where you could do it, the leaving certificate, and then go to WA University, which was the only university in Perth at the time. It was just an entirely different arena, or era would be better.
Mm.
If you went to the university, you were 10% of the population. And who would pay for it? Well, there were scholarships available.
Yeah.
There wasn't any such thing as fee help.
No.
And my mother was a war widow. And I wanted to go farming anyway.
Mm.
How did I end up doing a trade? Because my mother said, I don't want you ending up a hard drinking, hard swearing, womanizing farm labor. You need to get a trade, because her belief was if you had a trade, you always had a job.
Mm.
That was before the pandemic.
Mm.
Trades did always have a job, generally speaking.
Mm. So now just moving, kind of heading back towards Glacier View, you get a phone call recently, was it, from a past student who asked you quite a profound question? Can you share?
Yes. I won't give the student's name, but clearly it was soon after Glacier View, because he said 40 years ago, you said in class.
Right. So this is recently, but he would have been a
Yeah,
student.
October last year,
Yeah. Okay.
2019. He rang and he said, do you mind me asking you a question about something you said in class 40 years ago? And I said, no, I don't mind. What do you say I said? And he said, you said something must have happened in 1844, but I have no idea what. And I said, I don't recall saying that. However, it has a ring of truth about it. I think it's authentic. I think your memory is reliable, because it's 40 years ago for him as well. I said, because that was about where I was at after Glacier View. I still hadn't given up 1844. I just wasn't convinced. I wasn't convinced by Dev's polylismatic fulfillment to embrace it. And he wasn't either, I don't think, in the end, because I remember jogging with him on the Tuesday, I think, from memory. I wouldn't swear to that. After Heppenstall had put Des on the line on the Tuesday afternoon, we were jogging together. And Heppenstall had asked about 1844 and the investigative judgment in heaven. And Des choked on the word in heaven. And so he didn't want to say 1844 had any relevance to something going on in heaven. He was prepared to see it as a date where the Adventist Church arose, providentially arose. I asked him, charismatic should be able to embrace all the dates. And he said, no, not in heaven. And I said, is it all that important? This is the first time I've ever spoken about this or written about it, as far as I can recall. I said, is it all that important, Des, anyway, this 1844? And he said, that is what we're fighting for, Norm. For people to have the right to say, I don't think it's all that important, without fear of threat. That's what we're fighting for. And that's not a bad answer, is it? I don't think it's all that important, Des. Why are you doing all this for something that's not all that important? So that people can have the privilege of saying, I do not think it's all that important, without fear of threat or recrimination. And I would endorse Des's view now, I think.
That is profound.
Yeah. And of course, the student wanted to know, did I still stand by it? I said, I think the reason why I had trouble figuring out what happened in 1844 is because nothing happened in heaven in 1844. I find it really quite disturbing in a way that we who claim to be historicists, and historicism means that prophecy is fulfilled like peeling off the skins of an onion through history. So when you look at a timeline, and some of them are elaborate, that we Adventists can produce, they dates, great long lines of dates, and when this is fulfilled in this part of the Bible and so on, except for one. We've got a date, but nothing happened in history on that date. It happened in heaven. So as though we are historicists, when it comes to Daniel 8:14, we become Platonists. And it's in heaven. It's pretty hard to refute what happened in heaven, because have you taken a photo of it? No. How do we know what happened in heaven? Well, are we going to say because of Ellen White's visions? Hang on, I thought we were interpreting the Bible. And even if Ellen White had a vision, it's still not a history date. It's not a date in history, is it?
No.
It's in heaven.
Mm.
Something that's going on in heaven. And we're not privy to that.
That's a big statement. It makes sense.
Yeah, look, I really don't want to be negative
No.
at all. And I don't think certainly most young people that I know, but even older people, we don't live with our life focused on a date, do we?
No.
And I doubt that too many Adventists even think of Christ in the heavenly sanctuary every 22nd of October. I'd be very surprised.
There's a big movement going on to kind of bring the church back into line with those kind of things. When you look at current politics and the rise of the more independent, fundamental, conservative ministries.
Yeah, we don't want to. I mean, the Adventist community has been a very rich experience for me. The people I know and have known through, I mean, there's a promise, isn't there, that nobody will join Christ giving up family. I didn't give up my family, but friends, yes, and will not be given back to them 100-fold. And on top of that, eternal life. Well, I can only say that particular text has been fulfilled. The Adventists are good people. They're not perfect, otherwise we wouldn't need a gospel. But we need forgiveness and mercy, and we celebrate the Lord's Supper. And the Lord's Supper is the blood that was poured out symbolically in the Passover wine. And that was for the remission of sins. So every time we celebrate the Lord's Supper, we're saying we are in need of the mercy and forgiveness of God. None of us can ever celebrate the Lord's Supper and say, well, I don't need that bit, so I'll just have the bread. No, we all need mercy and forgiveness. But mercy and forgiveness, we don't want to abuse it. This is where we have to talk about how we respond. But, we seem to manage that with friendships without any problem. But as soon as we bring God onto the scene, it becomes a bigger problem. If we say, I want to please God, that's legalism. Huh? But if I want to please my wife, that's a good husband. If I want to love and cherish my grandchildren, well, that's a healthy relationship. Well, if I've got God, why don't I want a healthy relationship? In fact, there are texts in the New Testament that talk about pleasing God. Why would you not want to please your Heavenly Father? Of course, the one who spared not his son. Yes, him. Who delivered him up for us all. That's the one I'm talking about, that God. I want to please him. Will I do it perfectly? No. But do I make some kind of treaty with wrongdoing? Do I make some kind of treaty with hurting the God who loved me and gave himself for me? I hope not.
Mm. That's some golden sage words there, Norm.
Well, it is funny that this works and grace seem to be such a problem to us, but it shouldn't be. The relationship is always a gift. You can never earn a relationship. You can buy her flowers and send her chocolate. But if you think for a minute that flowers and chocolate are earning her love of you, you have misunderstood love. Love is a gift. It's unearned and unearnable. If a little granddaughter says to you, I love you too, when I say in Swedish, jag älskar dig, jag älskar dig, and the little one knows it means I love you, and she'll say, I love you too,
Mm.
morfar, my
Mm.
Swedish title for grandfather, morfar. And what a gift. What a
Mm.
gift that child has given me.
Mm.
It's not earned, but does it impact on my behavior towards the one that I'm in a healthy relationship with? Well, I jolly well hope so.
Mm.
There's something wrong with the relationship if it doesn't impact on my behavior at all. Is that legalism? No.
And you're not saying to her that she has to jump certain hurdles or behave certain ways for you to give that love back. It's
No.
reciprocated, isn't it?
Yes. Yeah.
And I think
You love them before they're born.
yes.
So they're not very obedient at that stage. They're probably
Yeah.
kicking their mother's liver.
I know that feeling now. And I think also a little golden moment there when you said when you're jogging with Des, and he wasn't saying he wanted to change the minds of people to his way of thinking, but he wanted
No,
to create a space where people could say, "I
yeah.
don't believe anything happened in heaven in 1844." Or not. You want to be out of that place where you're safe to
Yeah.
say it and you're not going to be kicked out because you've said it.
He
That's
still believed that he accepted a text like 2 Corinthians 5:10, where we'll all stand, and he's writing to Christians, we all stand before the judgment seat of Christ to give account for what we've done in the body, whether good or bad. Des accepted, but he was not comfortable with an extenuated process that at the time of Glacier View was 136 years. It's now, of course, 40 years later, so it's 176 years and growing. I won't live to see the year 200, but it's sort of on the horizon, isn't it? 200 years. It's kind of making soon a rather flexible date.
Mm.
And how can it be a pre-Advent judgment when it's 200 years, well, not yet, but 176 years currently, and growing from the event, the return of Jesus? We are prolonging the great disappointment, aren't we, really?
Mm.
Now, I want Jesus to come, but it's an expectation, it's a hope. Even with computers and logarithms and all the rest, I don't think we can set a date for it.
Mm.
That's in the mind and providence of God. So Des accepted a pre-Advent judgment, but it was a declaration of those who had remained in that faith relationship.
And one that was already evident in the Bible everywhere anyway. It didn't need a special date to have a prediction of a certain kind of new kind of judgment to begin.
No, exactly.
It was already well and truly established in the Bible.
Yes, you got Romans 14:10. You got references to judgment by deeds, by your works, but what kind of works? Is it because are you saved because of those works? No, those works are the fruit of that relationship, and they have no independent validity. In other words, in the judgment, not examined independently. I also think the judgment is a metaphor anyway. I don't think for a minute that God actually sits behind a big desk and angels come with all the books. It's using language that we can understand. And it's helpful language because it reminds us that the gospel of Christ is so important and so transforming in our lives that our deeds should reflect it. In other words, is there mercy in the judgment? Of course, because God it's not a different God. It's the merciful God that we know in Christ. So the idea of Jesus as the kind of defense lawyer and God as the judge, and that's horrible. God is the merciful God, but he lets us know by this metaphor of a judgment that we should live out our life in Christ. It's not something you can wrap in a napkin and bury and produce it when he returns and say, well, here's your talent back.
I love that. Yeah. That's another gem today, Norm. So when
some of these I'm pinching from others, of course.
when you had that moment after you'd listened to the tape of the forum meeting and you were kind of like, whoa, and you called Des. So it wasn't because
I wrote
you wrote
him.
to Des.
Yeah.
It wasn't, were you, so what you've just said there sounds like a lot of what he was kind of saying back then. At the time, were you not in alignment with that concept? Or were you more thinking, hang on, you've just dropped a bomb that's going to cause some pretty serious ramifications politically?
No, it was more in between situation. I mean, Des, when I said, I don't know, Des, your solution to the problem is, like firing a pea shooter at a masonry wall, huge, thick fortress wall. And his answer was to me, well, what have you got better? Well, I said, I don't have anything better, but I'm not persuaded that yours is all that good. And I don't have to have something better to say that. And I didn't give up at that point. I still thought there is something better and it'll pop up sooner or later, but it never did. And more I started to find myself aligning thoroughly with theirs. It wasn't a bit that I was ever against his view. I just didn't think it was sufficient. And at the end of the day, you have to say, well, the reason why we're having lots of trouble. You see, if you go back to Crozier, who wrote up Edson's vision
Inspired insight
in the cornfield. It was based heavily on the spring festivals were fulfilled literally in the first advent of Christ. So the autumn festivals will be fulfilled literally also at a later date, not in the first advent. The problem with that is the New Testament does apply autumn festivals to Christ, the crucified Christ, not the just before the second coming. So I'm afraid to base 1844 on the autumn feasts is a chimera. And so in the end, because I'd studied Hebrews pretty heavily, and I'd already had a problem my second year, and this was just reading the Bible, the KJV at that, where Jesus enters into the most holy place in the KJV translation. I went to Des with that in my second year. And Des said, calm down. In your third year and fourth year, we will spend a lot of time on that issue. And which we did. So certain doubts were already there and difficulties, if you like, the difficulties of trying to present it. When I knew that Hebrews applied the autumn feasts not to the predicting the second advent, but to the first advent, the achievement of Christ. And if the atonement is achieved at Calvary, which is something our pioneers didn't say and couldn't say, though Ellen White did in places. Ellen White's a bit of a mixed bag, you know. You can find text that will support this.
That's true.
But the appendix in Questions on Doctrine, quoting Ellen White, show very clearly she used the word atonement for the cross, and so does the New Testament. And I just have to finally admit I'm having trouble saying what happened, because nothing did happen. In heaven, I'm talking about.
Yeah.
On earth, as Des said, providentially, the Adventist Church rose up with a message about the Second Advent, the hope, the expectation of it. 176 years after 1844, that in itself is proving us that 1844 is, you know, our early pioneers talked about the judgment coming very soon. So the 1844 and the Second Advent were one event. They do believe in a pre-Advent judgment. Today, because there's 176 years gap, we can have we can have the date 1844, or we can have a pre-Advent judgment, but we can't have both. If we talk about a pre-Advent judgment, that's not back in 1844. That's too far away.
The investigative judgment is kind of the only unique kind of little module of Adventism. Does that scare some people if you take it away?
Yes, it would scare some people to take away. We have to have a raison d'etre, and this is the only teaching that's not found in the other churches. You know, Baptists are fairly comfortable with being Baptists, but they're not the only ones who baptize by immersion. And yet that is their unique thing. The Baptists have taken that ritual that they focus on as their name. In the same way, we've taken Seventh-day Adventist as our name, because Adventists were a split group, and we distinguished ourselves by being the seventh-day ones of the Adventist group.
If it's a providential thing, though,
I don't feel we have to have anything that's unique. Our experience is unique. Our history is unique. But why should we worry if we're sharing viewpoints? Some of our emphases are fairly unique. I don't think there are too many churches have an emphasis on a holistic lifestyle that we have. Some of those things, but our history is unique. I mean, my family is unique, but we're not the only humans on the planet. We're not the only married couple on the planet. We're not the only ones that got grandchildren on the planet. You know, that's true, but we still are unique. So you don't have to have something that nobody else has got. No. Nobody else has got our history. Nobody else has got our experience. So we are unique, and we don't have to come up with a far-fetched, highly difficult viewpoint to prove to be unique. Adventists are unique.
And the thing is that Buddhism, Taoism, Baptists, there's plenty of other providential movements that have arisen that are unique in their own way as well. I think Adventists want to try and claim that they're more than unique, they are chosen and therefore uniquely different to everything else.
Yes.
And that's a big push, isn't it?
Yes.
And more these days.
Yeah, the doctrine of the remnant can certainly make us the exclusive vehicle of the message of what? Of the soon coming of Christ? No, we're not the only ones preaching the soon coming of Christ. So what's this remnant? We're the only ones preaching the three angels' message? Well, the Mormons claim to be preaching the three angels' message. A different message, mind you, but the same text.
It strikes me that a lot of what you're saying what's the right word for it? Not shocking, but would be quite astounding for some people to take on board, some Adventists. But you think there's a place for Adventists? Do you think this dream that Des had, where people could say what you're saying and be accepted, has actually come to fruition? Or do you think that sadly maybe there isn't a place for people to say what you're saying for that kind of an Adventist?
Yes, well, we'll soon find out if you find me cut and quartered on the front lawn. You'll know we're not ready to allow people to have various opinions. All movements that are as large as ours and as widespread as ours, I don't know how many million, but 20 million probably, worldwide, 20 million Adventists in every kindred nation that you can think of. And so a huge variation is going to develop a left wing and a right wing. There's no political party in the world that doesn't have a left wing and a right wing. No group, whether it be the Returned Soldiers League or whatever, will have left and right. There's always going to be a conservative. And these are creative things, I think. I think they have a creative role, as long as they can respect each other. They have a creative role of helping keep us on the balance. But I would like to think we're getting to a point where somebody can take a viewpoint that's not where perhaps even the majority are. I mean, you can see this happening with a simple thing like the ordination of women. If you go to certain parts of the world where women are in the kitchen having, doing the cooking and the bedroom having babies, but the male is all and in all, it's going to be fairly difficult for them to catch on to where a liberal Western society might be, I suppose. But personally, I think wherever women are oppressed, we should protest against it. I don't think we should excuse it because, well, this is how it is culturally. I mean, the fact that domestic violence appears to be so accepted in certain societies just north of us doesn't make that right, does it?
No.
And we ought to be able to say what you think is your cultural right. But don't hide it. Don't hide this sin by calling it cultural. Let's call sin by its right name.
Do you think that's why there was such an outpouring of grief over the no vote at the last GC session?
Well, undoubtedly, because they were trying to reach a compromise. That is, that each division, according to where they were at in their experience, social experience, could handle it, and others it might take longer before they can get a mind around it. So Australia, the South Pacific Division would be able to choose to ordain women because it's where our society is at. Now, we're not doing it because that's where our society is at. It's just that our society has confronted us with something. And when we stop and think about it in the light of the gospel of Christ, we know it's right. The questions might be actually put to us by our society, but our answers we're going to give are going to be from our Christian base. But the fact that our society has led the way and we're still counting the jolly numbers is incredible to me.
And I think under Jan Paulsen, and I'm not saying he was a perfect leader at all, but I think under his leadership, if he or someone like him had been president at the time of the last session, the last GC program, meeting, whatever, I think the vote may have gone the other way. It might have been a more positive outcome. But under the current climate, where I believe, this is me saying, not saying you're saying this, but with the current president, Ted Wilson seems to be lobbying everyone to take the church to kind of a different place. And with the introduction of the compliance document I mentioned before, I'm seeing less hope for the freedom of women and equality within the church than more hope. How can people feel that things are changing in a positive light under those kind of circumstances?
We have to face the fact that the world at large has lurched to the right, politically, economically. The right is where the strength is at the moment, not the left. That's just a fact of our world at the moment. Our world is a conservative world, by and large. And our church is no different. That's why fundamentalism has thrived, not just in Christian faith, but also in other faiths as well. I don't believe that all faiths are the same. I mean, I don't believe in the karmic cycle, so it's very difficult for me to be a Hindu. And because I don't believe in the karmic cycle, I don't see the gospel of Buddhism as a gospel. I don't need release from the karmic cycle, which is what Buddhism is all about, because I don't believe in the karmic cycle. I don't believe that I come back according to how I lived this life. And anyway, that's a form of legalism with bells on, I would have thought, that I try and live a good life so I won't come back as a fly.
That's similar to the investigative judgment, though.
Yes, it is.
So why would you not take on board Buddhism or Hinduism because of that kind of thing that is something that doesn't align with you, but you have taken on Adventism and stayed, even though there's a similar parallel between that karmic sort of comparison?
Okay, except that the karmic cycle is central to Hinduism in a way, and also central to Buddhism. Buddhism is a pathway that delivers me from the karmic cycle, so I won't be in this rebirth on and on.
One major path of Buddhism does, but another major path doesn't. They don't believe in a supernatural ongoing reincarnation.
Well, no Buddhist really can believe in because the whole thing is to bring our desires to a standstill, because that's what feeds the karmic cycle. So you wouldn't get a Buddhist saying comfortably that his viscera was moved within him, of which it speaks of Jesus many times, where his viscera was tightened within him with compassion. No. A Buddhist has to bring all desire to a standstill, and that stops the feeding of the karmic cycle, and that gives me nirvana, which is just simply cessation.
So if Norm Young is a Buddhist and he's evangelizing Buddhism, but he realizes he doesn't believe in that karmic kind of thought anymore, does he successfully continue to be a Buddhist?
Not really. Well, not a Theravada Buddhist anyway. He might be a Manana Buddhist because they're sort of more loose. But I think the Theravada Buddhism is nearer to the teaching of the Buddha. And your question is like saying, if Jesus' death on the cross was not a saving event, would you still be able to be a Christian? Well, yeah.
I'm putting it in a subset, though. You could put it in that way with Christ and Christianity and the cross, but I'm putting it in the Adventist subset. Okay. If Norm Young's an Adventist and he comes to the point where one of the fundamental kind of karmic equivalent beliefs is not something he agrees with anymore, can he still successfully evangelize Adventism and bring people into the church?
I think so. I've done so.
And as they poke their head in the door and see the compliance document hanging from the rafters, what do you say to them then?
I'd have to prepare them for that. It is true, you do have to be prepared. But, I know so many Adventists, and as I've said already, Adventists don't go to bed on October 22 thinking of the pioneers.
I think many are, though, now. I think there's a real growth in the last
Well, I've looked at the last two records
The
that
last
came
2 years.
nearest to October 22 and looked in vain for some comment about.
I don't think the record's the place to go to find anything challenging with regards to
You would think on
controversy.
the 22nd of October, on the 22nd of
Oh,
October,
I see what you're saying. When we had the recent 22nd of October, there was no mention of it in the record.
not that I could find, and certainly no editorial. So I don't think it looms large on the Adventist ethos, or psyche, perhaps Adventist psyche. Could I accept the teachings of Jesus, the values of the teaching of Jesus, and not accept his being God incarnate and his death being an atoning death? I would find it very hard to cease following the Christ way, because I think it's an excellent way to live, his teaching, his values. Whether I can separate them from the theological side of his teaching, I don't know. I remember once meeting up on my walks down Alton Road with the late Pastor Ray Stanley. And because we bumped into each other fairly frequently, Chris Aykroyd, my walking partner, and myself with Ray Stanley. This particular day, Chris was somewhere else, and I was walking by myself down Alton Road, and I catch up to Ray Stanley, who was a very good walker, mind you. And he was an evangelist and fairly conservative, but a decent man. And we got on quite well as walking partners and conversing partners while we walked. And I asked Ray one time, Ray, if Gabriel came to you and sat on the edge of your bed and said, Pastor Stanley, you've lived a long and good life. You've preached about Christ's coming in many a picture theatre and hall. But I want to tell you, you will not live to see him come. Indeed, none of your children or grandchildren will live to see him come. Now, Gabriel's told you this on the foot of your bed, Ray. I said, would you still be a Christian? Now, admittedly, I did say Christian, not Adventist. And he thought for a little while, not long, a split second, I guess, but he did hesitate. And then he said, no, I would still be a Christian. I said, I think that's the right answer, Ray, because the reason why we became Christians is not because we were scared stiff by the soon coming of Christ, not because of fear, but because of the attractiveness of Christ, the attractiveness of his person, of his teaching, of his behavior, of his death, and the hope of his return through his resurrection and ascension. But I said we didn't become Adventists simply because of the second coming of Christ. And even if that event didn't happen in our lifetime or our grandchildren's lifetime, I would still be a Christian. And an Adventist Christian. I mean, it is in Adventism that I learned the gospel of Christ. It's in this context. Now, admittedly, I've read widely, and I've read evangelical literature as well as less evangelical literature. But it is within Adventism that I heard the gospel. And particularly, Des Ford was a major spokesperson, but not the only one.
That's a nice little segue back into a couple of questions about Glacier View that I wanted to go. And someone has asked me to do a timeline that they can see. So I've got a little whiteboard I'm just going to bring over. And also, can I just say that I think that when that student rang you, well, it's going to be hard to see, isn't it? When that student rang you and you said what you said to him, oh boy, this is not, I should have thought this out a bit more before. That'll do. You won't be able to read it, I'm sure. I think what a wonderful, authentic and honest thing to say to him. I think a lot of young people these days really seek that authenticity and that honesty. So I think good on you for speaking your truth to him and
I
saying
think
your truth. You know.
I think that he was already, when he rang me,
Mm,
um, moving in his own thinking. I don't know. He didn't tell me where he was at,
mm.
but he certainly had. I mean, we talked on the phone for quite a long time, and we emailed once or twice. And the kind of questions he was asking clearly were growing out of somewhat along the lines of where I was at when I spoke 40 years ago in class.
Mm,
I think something happened in 1844, but I don't know what.
mm.
Um, and I think he was moving in that direction himself.
Have you spoken of that publicly much yourself before?
Uh, you mean the
That
phone
that you don't
conversation of the
that you
student
don't believe anything? No, no, no. That you don't believe anything supernatural happened in 1844
in heaven?
in heaven.
Yes. Did I believe anything happened in heaven?
Yeah.
Um, yes, I said there was a forum over in the Uniting Church, I think, in the trees in Morisset.
Oh yes.
That Lyndon Rogers, who is the chair of the Sydney Forum, uh, we had a question there, question and answer, and I was on the panel, and I was asked that question, and yeah, I said I don't think anything happened.
Mm.
And
Yeah.
how would you refute that? By demonstrating something did happen?
Exactly. You
Uh,
can't.
yeah. Give me a video of it.
Yeah. That's when you have to go. Well, this is what Ellen White said. That's
Yeah,
what that's the loop, though, isn't it? You go, well, Ellen White said that, but Ellen White said go back to the Bible, and if the Bible disagrees with my light, well, that's new light, so follow that instead of what I'm saying, and it
yeah.
creates this loop. So I just want to. This is mainly for a lot of young people that have said they're just not 100% sure of the timeline, and so you can't really see it there, I know, but I'll just kind of speak it out loud, and I'll hold it up close later for someone if they want to kind of, well, they can take notes. But we've got the forum meeting. That's the 1979. That's kind
Yeah,
of the big splash explosion thing, isn't it? That happened.
yeah, yeah,
That's October as well, is it?
yeah. October 1979.
So that creates this big kind of
I'm not sure of
splash.
the date. I think off the top of my head, the 27th of October, but I'm not certain.
Yeah,
27th of October,
that rings a
1979,
bell.
in PUC, and it was a forum where Des was promised that forums were places where you could speak your mind and without fear of any kind of fallout.
You know, it's interesting. I've heard about that meeting for many years, but I listened to it for the first time this morning.
Okay.
Yeah, Jill posted it on one of the feeds here, one of the posts, and so while I was having a shower this morning, I turned the volume up, and it goes for about an hour and 2 minutes. So I didn't have an hour shower, but I,
Hope not. 4 minutes
I,
max.
I
4 minutes
it
max.
could have been a half an hour, but it was. I can see why your jaw dropped when you heard the tape back then.
Yes.
Um, it was very powerful, and
Yeah.
he like you, he has a really good way of speaking publicly. Quick sidetrack: you were the Friday night speaker for my graduation at Avondale College,
Oh, is that
and
right?
what I remember is you started the evening's talk by saying. You will not remember that Norm Young spoke tonight, but you will. I hope you will take away the message I'm about to tell you. And of course, I remember that you spoke that night, but I can't remember what the message was.
Well, do you remember one of the illustrations? You
No.
find often people remember the
I,
illustration, but not what it was illustrating.
you know what I was thinking at the time? I thought, now that he said that, that's what I'm going to remember. Oh no.
I forgive you, Peter. I'll tell you now, I don't even remember that I took the Friday night meeting when you graduated, and I don't have a clue what I spoke on. And I don't remember you in the grad class either.
No, I think I only just made it. I
I'm
was in a
sure you
group.
did.
I was in a group called the Beagles, and we spent a lot of time playing music and writing songs rather
Did
than
you say
actually
that? Did you say the Beatles?
Beagles.
Oh, the Beagles, not the Beatles.
Yeah, imagine, boy, yeah. Anyway, so back to our timeline. So we've
Yeah,
got the forum meeting, but
yeah,
before Glacier View, what that date was, what, August 1980?
yeah. August 1980.
So August 1980, Des gets a
And
call.
remember the 27 fundamentals as they then were had been passed at the General Conference in 1980. So they were a newly minted. The
And they were, what were they called? The Dallas
Yes,
something?
that's correct.
The Dallas document or something?
Yeah, the Dallas fundamental statement. And number 23 was the one on the sanctuary.
Right. Oh, well, that starts to make a bit of sense too. So it was fresh in everyone's mind. So at
Yeah,
some
that was,
point between October and August the next year, Des gets a call from Neil, and Neil says, "Put together your thoughts, and we want you to come to Glacier View and present them in a more we want to critique them more than just the forum, which was just a way
oh,
to just have a. These are my thoughts."
yeah, no, he was given 6 months leave of absence from PUC, where he was a professor, and sent to Washington, D.C. There was a guiding committee that was appointed with people like Jim Cox and that on it. And he produced this manuscript over that 6 months period. And that Glacier View responded to that manuscript. Des was to be present, but he wasn't to speak. But in the end, some of the heavies said, well, we'd like to hear from him as well. So Des was given the opportunity to speak.
So we've got this 6 months, um, and we're not sure what point you were given manuscripts, but sometime before there.
Oh, sometime before the August, and I can remember certainly having them in July.
Yeah.
So at least a month.
Okay. Now, how long did Glacier View actually go for? That.
Oh, it was a week.
So there's a week here. Now, at the end of that week, who gets together and puts this other document, the consensus document, together? Who puts that together?
There was a committee, and it was written up. I think Bill Johnson had a fair, but it was based on what the small groups were saying.
Right.
And the consensus statement, as it was called, was written up by a smaller group, but drawing on what the little study groups, what their reports were. And
Right.
I think they did a pretty good job of it.
Yeah,
I think it reflected what the smaller groups were saying. And then it was put to the plenary session, if I can use that sort of language.
Yeah.
On the Friday morning.
This is in that week still.
Yeah. And all the people who had been involved in Glacier View through the small groups and that assembled for a final. And the consensus document was put to the vote. And I think it virtually, I hesitate to say unanimous, but I think it was unanimous.
Yeah.
Very, very close to unanimous, accepted by the large group.
Yeah.
And I can remember Des Ford being asked by Fred Veltman. I was right near the two of them. And Fred Veltman said to Des, what do you think, Des? And Des's response, now, you forget over 40 years an awful lot of stuff, obviously. But there are some bits and pieces that stick like a burr. And Des's response to Fred Veltman is stuck like a burr. He said, I think, or maybe I believe, I'm not sure of the verb, I believe I can live within this.
Yes, that's what I was about to say. So for this moment in time, there's this glimmer of hope where
Yeah,
he says, I can
live
live with
with,
this.
yeah.
And I think what happens next, and I kind of want to defend you a bit here a lot.
All right, I don't mind being okay.
You're in jumps the politicians and the administrators, not willing to kind of accept this consensus, realizing it may kind of shake the church a little bit more than they would like. And so they draw upon material that you've written with six other guys, which has become famously known as the 10-point statement or document.
Mm.
And I think, and I might be wrong, but I read an article of yours where you were talking. What was it called? Help me out. You wrote it. Where you were saying it was. You regretted being involved, or what was the title of the article?
Oh, was it a reluctant
That's it. Yes.
participant looks back at Glacier View?
I found that a really interesting article. I'd encourage people to read that. So you were reluctant, but do you think that it may have been worse than that, and they kind of used your material, which basically went on to highlight some key differences from the consensus that were actually very different to what Des had been saying?
Yeah.
Do you feel a little bit thrown under the bus with what happened then?
Well, I don't think I was thrown under the bus. I think I was hit by a bus, but nobody threw me there. I wasn't pushed or shoved. I just blindly went ahead and got hit by a bus. But not totally blindly. I mean, Neil Wilson was obviously a very consummate administrator.
Mm.
I wasn't. And he came to me on the breakfast time, I think on the Wednesday, and asked me would I be on this small group. And
So this is in that week, the Glacier View week.
yes,
And
yes,
they called this a Sanctuary Review Committee.
that's right. It was the Sanctuary Review Committee, the whole thing, but they wanted to do this little subcommittee because he said some of the administrators don't know where Des is differing from the church's positions. And we need a little statement just outlining for administrators, clarify where Des differs from the church. And I felt queasy about the request. I mean, I was only at Glacier View because Des had invited me. He asked for the privilege of having 4 people present that he had chosen.
So, sorry, just to clarify, was Neil aware of the consensus document at this stage? Had that already come out?
Well, it was in process still.
Right. So, but did he maybe get a feeling that the consensus thing was not going to be enough?
Yes. Oh, yes. I think that the direction it was headed, the consensus document was going to be a blending of all the small groups, where the small groups were mostly headed. If the consensus document reflected that, as it did, then it was certainly something that Des might well be able to live with.
Mm.
It wasn't something that was going to be difficult for Des to accept. There'd be some things that he wouldn't have been entirely happy with, But there was probably some things in that consensus document that nobody was entirely happy with. In other words, that's what a consensus is. A
Yeah, it's not
consensus
total agreement. Yeah.
Yeah, it's to find something that not the preferred view of anybody, but the best view that all of us could agree on.
Yeah. So tell us more about that conversation. He comes up to you while you're having breakfast.
Yeah, well, first of all, why I was at Glacier View was because Des had requested me to be there. So that's where the reluctant participant came from. I did not want to go. I had enough nous to know I don't think this is going to be pretty. And I'm a loyal Seventh-day Adventist on the one hand. I'm trying to be a loyal friend on the other. I could see me as a general fighting on two fronts, or a horse rider on two horses. It just looked unwinnable.
It looked unwinnable.
Yeah, or unpleasant, probably a better word. And anyway, I went, and then on the Wednesday, Wilson himself approached me and said, would I be on this small panel to clarify where there's different. I went first to Jim Cox because I'd grown to respect this man, even though I didn't know him well. I didn't know him at all before going to Glacier View, but he was a leading New Testament scholar and a very enjoyable person and a very insightful one. And he said, it's a very hard ask, Norm, a hard ask. So I thought, oh, well, I'll go to Des himself, which I did. I went to Des himself and said, look, they've asked me to be on this committee that's going to say where you differ from the Church Orthodox teaching. What do you think? And Des says, better you than somebody else. Well, in actual fact, the best answer would have been better somebody else than you, Norm. And anyway, that was Des's response.
He may have realised that when Neil said, I just want it for the admin clarification, that it may have been a little bit more far-reaching than that.
Yeah. The people.
But what a nice thing to say to you, though.
Yeah. Yes, it was nice.
Yeah.
But still not enjoyable. So we met only twice. I guess we met sometime on the Wednesday, I'm not sure when. And we divided them up, who was going to write on what of the 10 points. I only had the one, and I only take responsibility for that one.
Number 2.
Oh, whatever it is. I printed them out somewhere. I did try and clarify, about 25 years later, who wrote what. And I can tell you what I think it was. And I wrote to all the people who were that I could still write to. The first one was methodology, then the Day of Atonement in the Book of Hebrews. Yes, that's me. Number 2, as you said, the phrase within the veil. That was by Dedrin. The methodology was probably Spengler, but it may have been Londas. Londas was the secretary. The phrase within the veil was Dedrin. The year-day principle was Arthur Furch, lamented after Furch. The apostolismatic principle was Douglas. The use of SDAQ in Daniel 8:14 was Furch. The relationship of Daniel 7:8 and 9 was Furch. Antiochus Epiphanes was Dedrin. And saints in the judgment was Furch. And the role of Ellen G. White in doctrinal understanding was either Londas or Douglas. I think on reflection, probably Douglas, because Herb Douglas was involved with the White estate. And the methodology was probably Londas. Spengler was the chair of it, but I don't think he wrote anything. Now, if you look at my statement, you'll find it one place, and this was pointed out to me at a workers' meeting on Glacier View. that I wrote in the third person. And I also got Des to read mine. So I made one little change because he pointed something out. So I had Spangler's permission to show my draft to Des. So I had Des read it. So I knew, and Des himself said of all the 10 points that they were accurate representations of his view and how they differed from orthodoxy. But I was positive. I wrote, there is agreement that on within the veil and things like that. But there's one place where we've changed from the third person to almost confessional, but we do say, we go to the first person. And that was written by the committee, not by me.
Right.
So I don't own that bit.
And what?
Now, the part that I profoundly regret, and I shared it with Des and said, we have to have something like this because it's got to go through a screening committee. And I said that it'll get thrown out, I said, because it's so positive. But if we end up with this sentence, these are unwarranted differences from the church or something like that, we'll get it through. They'll only read that line. They won't really read all the positive statements I've said.
What was the line again?
But I will never say this again. I don't know. I don't know. I'll have to go to the 10-point statement in the October. Well, I don't know where the 10 points are in this. This came out in October 1980, special sanctuary issue of the ministry. And somewhere in it, don't ask me when, why didn't I mark it? Hey, I did mark it. Hey, how about that? It's marked. Statement on Desmond Ford document. It says, I'll read the whole thing if you like. The Day of Atonement in the book of Hebrews. In his position paper, Dr. Ford asserts emphatically that the epistle to the Hebrews teaches that the risen Christ, by virtue of his own blood or sacrificial death, entered into the heavenly most holy place at his ascension. See his works 187, 195, the position paper as it was called. The cleansing of the heavenly things mentioned in Hebrews 9:23, he also believes applies only to the initial New Testament period. The Day of Atonement sacrifice, as well as the other Levitical sacrifices and the high priest's entrance into the most holy place, finds fulfillment according to Ford in Christ's death and ascension into the presence of God. Christ then is the high priest of God's right hand, has opened up a new access and center of worship for the people of God. Ford declares that he can find in Hebrews no allusion to Daniel or any reference to a two-phase ministry of the risen Christ. He does affirm, however, the reality of the heavenly sanctuary. There is basic agreement that Christ, at his ascension, entered into the very presence of God, as symbolized by the earthly high priest's entrance on the Day of Atonement. There is also general acceptance that neither Daniel nor a two-phased ministry are referred to in the epistle to the Hebrews. But we do deny, now this is where we change from third person to, but we do deny that his entrance into the presence of God, one, precludes a first apartment phase of ministry, or two, marks the beginning of the second phase of his ministry, assuming that there is a second phase. That was added by the screening committee. So I don't take any blame for that. Ford believes that the heavenly sanctuary intercession of Christ finds a providential crisis in what he understands to be the rediscovery of the gospel through a new appreciation of the sanctuary symbolism. See page 260 of his position paper. This rediscovery he relates to the 1844 movement and the visions of Ellen G. White. See page 260 again. However, Ford denies that Christ's heavenly ministry climaxes in the initiation of a judgment intercession beginning in 1844, and then page numbers. Ford does believe that the Day of Atonement imagery finds fulfillment in judgment, even pre-Advent judgment in the book of Revelation. This latter, however, is a declaration at the close of Christ's heavenly intercession, just before the second Advent. It is not a heavenly judicial process beginning in 1844. The proclamation that providentially began in 1844 refers, in Ford's opinion, only to the believer's present decision of faith and the future pre-Advent judgment, but not to a present judicial process in heaven. Pages 652, etc. And then the sentence, which I profoundly regret to this day: this is an unwarranted reduction of Adventist belief. And now, I didn't believe that sentence at the time I wrote it. And really, it was put there as a way of getting through what was basically approving much of what Des had said. And I said there's general agreement. I didn't even put my own neck out. General agreement in the groups. But I said, if we want to get it through the screen, we're going to have to give them something like this. Des had reluctantly agreed to it. And I did try and change it. I saw Spangler on the Friday morning and said, I want to change that last sentence. But he says it's too late.
Was that because he was kind of, Neil had gotten in his ear?
I don't know. I wasn't privy to any of the administrative toing and froing. But I would say probably he was right. It had all been through the screening committee. They were already printing it all up. I don't know.
That's a pretty heavy thing to have pondered when you say that you feel that you regretted saying that, because it's a sad thing in life to have to deal with. We all do things, don't we? We all have things we've done we wish we could take back. Yeah. And to have to, live with that.
It was done on pragmatic grounds. I didn't think that the way I'd written it up for Des, that it would pass through unscathed. Well, it didn't pass through unscathed. They did that additional piece about we do deny. But I think it would have been even brutalized even more. But they would have grabbed that final sentence and hung on that, which is really said something that didn't really suit what I'd written.
Perhaps
now it is, of course, what I wrote there, even though I've said there's general agreement, I don't mean general agreement in the church. It was out of sync with our standard beliefs.
Yeah.
So I hadn't fulfilled, I guess, the requirement, which was to show where Des differed from orthodoxy, but to some degree I did, because I outlined at the start sort of the teachings to some degree. But anyway.
If you had your time again, you might have put it was a warranted reduction.
Yes, indeed. Yeah.
So
thank God for this creative, piece of lateral thinking. That,
yeah. Well, the beautiful thing about social media and this discussion, and we can be open, we can rectify the past, we can heal, we can not have it suppressed or hidden. So you have your 10 points. everyone's expecting they're going to be delivering the consensus document, and Des is going to be, yep, I can live with that. How did they get that off the table and bring in the 10 points and
I'm not
say no
sure.
again?
I'm not sure, but I think it was already Plan B, that statement. I think they already could see which way the small groups were going, and I don't think the consensus statement shocked the boots off them. I tell you what did shock the boots off them. Des says it's moving in my direction. Now, I used to tell Des, you ought not to say that because it puts yourself center stage. I mean, there were movements among Adventist scholarship that were already thinking independently of Des the same sort of things. And instead of saying the scholars agree with me, I wanted him to say, I agree with most of the Adventist scholars. Just a minor thing, just to show that there was a community of thinking in the room. But as always, they were aligning themselves with Des rather than Des was actually reflecting where many of them were. But be that as it may, he said there are 12 places which are quite harmonious with my position paper. That was the 1,000-word document, the position paper. And of course, they said, where? And of course, he listed them very quickly. And you can find them in that October issue of the ministry, 12 things that Des was comfortable with in the consensus statement. Well, of course, once they knew that Des had 12 things which the consensus statement he was happy with, they dropped the consensus statement, like a hot scone. And they said, bring in Plan B, which was the 10-point statement. Now, that was highly unfortunate because the people who wrote it not with that in view, that in mind. And secondly, it was never put to the vote. There was no contribution other than, Furch, Blondus, Young, Dedrin, and Dedrin, and somebody else. Spangler, of course, but he didn't actually contribute. He was the chair. I just can't remember off the top of my head. That's most of them anyway.
Yeah.
I think there were only the 6 of us, actual fact.
Yeah, I read that there was 6 of you.
Yeah, that includes Spangler.
Oh, okay. I thought it was 6 plus Spangler, but I could be totally wrong. I wasn't there.
Well, I was, but that was a long time ago. Oh, Douglas. Yeah, Douglas.
Oh, right.
So Londus, Douglas, Furch, Dedrin, Young. Oh, that's only 5.
Oh, okay. So it was 5 and Spangler was 6, but he was more of a chairperson.
He was the chairperson. He didn't write anything. And we only met twice, once to say who would write what, and then the second time to have each one read out their draft statement, which the other members could comment on. But there was very little input from the others, I'd say 0, very little comment. It was done in great haste because I was Wednesday morning, I was invited.
2 meetings.
Yeah, and then we had to submit it by Thursday, and it went to the screening committee on the Thursday night. So
when that then goes to the screening committee, it's suddenly what happens in the meetings? Does Neil get up and say, right?
I don't remember.
We're going to bring Des to accountability. Come and have a meeting with us, Des. Agree with this, or you're out. What was that kind of next stage?
Well, I wasn't there, so that's very difficult for me to answer that. I was at the screening committee as that went through. We were there, the people who had drafted it, just simply, I don't know, as observers. We weren't sitting at the same table. It was a fairly large group, the screening committee. I don't recall whether Neil Wilson was there. I remember Walter Scragg spoke out quite often. Uh, but I wasn't, when Des met with Parmenter and Wilson and whoever else on the Friday afternoon, after the consensus statement had been unanimously voted through, I wasn't present. I know a rumour went around that Des had been asked to hand in his credentials, and that upset many of the scholars. I can remember on the Friday night, because after the consensus, the sanctuary, after the sanctuary review committee, they had a Bible consultation in the same venue, and some of the same people were on both. And on the Friday night, I think was the first night of the Revelation seminar. And I can remember sitting next to Fritz Guy, who had his credentials in his hand to pass into Wilson. But Wilson, very skillful man, he poured, oil on troubled waters and assured everybody that Des hadn't been fired, hadn't been asked for his credentials, and so on. But all that was true in fact, but not in spirit.
The axe was falling but hadn't fallen.
Well, he had been given an ultimatum that everybody there knew he could not accept.
And when did that ultimatum come? So
on the Friday afternoon.
So that actually in the Glacier View week, it all happened in that week.
Yes.
Wow.
And on that Friday,
so this is...
I forget how it would go. A better source would be Jill Ford, because she was present.
Yeah, I'm hoping that we might be able to get Jill to chat to us, see how we go.
But it was along the lines that if you can't accept this, and this, then you should hand in your credentials.
And that would have been in a small meeting with just Neil. Yeah. You know who was in the meeting there? Neil, Des. That's what you're saying. I should ask others that one.
Yeah, I know. Neil was there. Des was there. Parmenter was there. Probably a couple of other vice presidents. I really don't know. That kind of thing is not something that...
So were you all kind of there on the last night of dinner, and Des comes out of the headmaster's office and says, "Sorry guys, I've lost my job"? When did you all know that he had actually not been able to agree with the...
Well, the rumour went around on the Friday, late Friday, that Des had been fired. And this was fairly upsetting to a large number of scholars. And then, as I say, on the Friday evening meeting, sort of a Vespers meeting, which was the inaugurating the next set of meetings on a Revelation kind of seminar, Wilson assured us this is not true. He hadn't been fired. Well, technically that was true. But if you tell somebody this, and this, otherwise this.
And that meeting had already happened with just Des. Right.
Yeah. Oh. Yes. That happened on the Friday afternoon, and then in the Friday
night.
Meeting.
So he reassured everyone that night.
Yeah.
And that was the end of the weekend, the Friday night?
Yes. As far as Glacier View is concerned, yes.
Did you speak to Des that night?
No.
Did you speak to him after he'd had the meeting with...
Not that I can recall.
Parmenter?
I don't think so.
Did you get a chance to talk to Neil or Parmenter again after he had asked you to do the 10-point statement to join that?
Well, I could have talked to Neil Wilson if I'd wanted to, I suppose, but I don't remember going and talking to him.
No, there was no kind of conversation happening afterwards.
No. I wasn't, I was a junior lecturer.
Yeah.
I wasn't in the same ballpark as, the president of the general conference. I would have been a bit, the first time I'd been to USA, the first time I'd met these scholars like Fritz Guy and Ivan Blaze and Jim Cox, I'd never met them.
Would have been exciting as well.
That part was the only plus I can think of.
Yeah.
From the meeting.
So you then kind of hopped on your plane soon after, headed home.
Yeah, yeah. Now I flew back with Parmenter,
Wow.
so I would have
What, in
talked
the
to
sitting
Parmenter.
next to each other?
Yeah, there was no COVID-19 then. You could sit next to me.
With Keith Parmenter.
Yeah, and
What did you
I
talk
felt,
about for 15 hours?
I think he slept. I think he took a pill or something. But we did talk, and I felt sorry for him actually, because he told, he could see he was absolutely dreading coming back to Australia
Really?
because he had the job of trying to hold together a church that was going to, be
Erupt.
at war. And he just feared the situation. That's the impression I got as I talked to him.
He'd kind of caused it a little bit, though. Well, he'd not have caused it. I don't mean that in a bad way. He'd been a player in having that outcome occur. And
Yeah,
but
yeah,
in his defence, there were people, the concerned brethren, putting pressure on him. Um, People wanted their church back. We've talked about these kind of
yeah.
the two churches in one. Um,
Well,
so
there's no
I think
doubt about
I
that.
think he was genuinely trying to get his church back.
Look, there was a move to try and get Des into the big evangelistic centre, the New Gallery in London, and I remember Duncan, Eva, and myself meeting up with Des one day during the Glacier View, and putting that to him, and I put it to him. I said, this is a good idea. He didn't have to organise it. They were going to have an organiser. He just happened to be the front person, the speaker. And I can remember him saying to me he would be willing to go anywhere, but he said they would hunt me there. Wherever I go, Norm, they will hunt me. There's no place for me to hide. He said, when I go onto a campground, every tent has already been loaded with literature attacking me as a person in every way possible, and some of it quite scurrilous, I understand.
Mm.
So I think he had sort of come to the end of his tether too, actually. He'd
Mm.
had enough of it. Was my impression. And yeah, now you asked something else. There's some other thing, and I was going to
No,
ask.
I was just talking about. I understand the pressure. I understand that people are genuine on both sides, trying to, they're trying to fight to get their church back or their perception of their church.
Yeah,
The progressive Adventists, the new theology, the excitement of the gospel, the freedom that perhaps questions on doctrine.
yeah,
The release allowed people to kind of explore a bit more, and then the other group that went, "Hang on, we didn't agree with the release of that book." Andreessen and these guys, and
yeah,
out of that grows the concerned brethren and a movement. But I'm saying that people on both sides are kind of have a birthright with Adventism, and they kind of fought hard to keep the Adventism that was theirs. So I can understand. I have empathy with both sides in that regard.
mm. Yeah,
Bring in politics, power, and money, and it kind of shifts everything. But
yeah. I mean, any conflict is never pretty,
no,
and you know, I mean, I know that dear old Athol Tolhurst had in mind that I would be next. I understand, but when he retired from the Barrel area of the Southern Highlands and built a house here in Currambong, he was living in the village, in the retirement village, while they were building the house. And it was in Alton Road, at the top end of Alton Road. And he and Linley used to walk down every morning to look at the house. It took them forever, this company, to build the thing. And I won't name the company. but I would never use them after what Ethel went through. And we got walking with them. We'd sometimes meet several, and then we'd stand outside their house in its rudimentary form as a brick went up, brick by brick, and chat with the pair of them. And we got quite friendly. I think he discovered, Norm doesn't actually have any horns and no tail, and he doesn't wear a red suit. And I actually invited him home for Sabbath lunch with Carmel and Ray Roundfeld joined us. Now, he is a fantastic guy, or was, most pleasant. And as I said to Liz, it's not his fault that he was brought up in an ultra-conservative missionary's home. And, there was just a spirit of acceptance. And we both knew what areas not to go on to. We knew where the landmines were. And so we didn't talk about them.
So you didn't discuss any of that?
We didn't discuss Glacier View or 1840. But we did share our love of the Lord and our commitment to the church.
Mm.
By church, I mean community, not structure.
Mm.
And we had a lovely Sabbath meal together. Just before he went off to, where was it? Tonga, I think. Tonga. I think that's where he grew up, or was born and bred. He said to me, Norm, we must have you and Liz home for lunch. And I said, no, we don't invite people home on a quid pro quo basis. You don't have to invite us back. He said, no, you don't understand. We want to. So we had become quite friendly, and I think we'd buried the hatchet, not in my skull. And unfortunately, he died on that trip to Tonga. Mm. And I can honestly say I genuinely grieved at the news that he had died. So there was not agreement in theology between us, but there was a respect of each other as a person. Mm. And my wife, who was slower to forgive him, finally did. I said, because we had a call to Andrews and Athol, who was at Washington, D.C. at the time, rang through to the chair of Andrews and said, no, not that guy, don't call him. And he wasn't on the committee that called me, but he had an input into it. And so it was stopped. And now my wife didn't want to go to USA. So I said, well, you've got your will through. She was still angry. I said, boy, you were hard to please. I said, you're praying to the Lord not to go to the States. And when he does what you pray for, you're angry. She says, well, I wanted it to be our decision, not somebody else's.
I agree with Liz.
And so she was very irate with Athol. But when she had him home for a meal and saw what a good man, good Christian, decent, good-humored, pleasant guy that he was, she forgave him. And I had never actually held anything against him. I said, Liz, I've sat on committees and they bring names to them. And I've said, no, not him. Mm. So I said, that's all he did. I said, no, he's not the man for the position.
Good job. I do remember you and Arthur Patrick kind of were often in the firing line of people.
Yeah, I probably deservedly, Arthur wasn't. I've made the statement that the only one in Australia now I'm thinking of in my circle, I guess, Bob Park would be another one that you could think of. But I said there are not too many people who can think back through the whole era of Glacier View and post-Glacier View without feeling that we could have done that better. Yeah. I said the exception, is Arthur Patrick. Right. Arthur Patrick could not have done more than he did. and he did it ethically. He did it above board, and just Arthur Patrick. He was a special man.
Incredible man. Incredible man. Greatly missed.
Yes, indeed, indeed.
I'm hoping to invite Joan on the on to be interviewed on the podcast.
Okay.
I'd love to hear some of her reflections.
Yeah, yeah.
You
Well,
know,
another one just popped into my head that I got to know. He was on the same group as mine, group number 4, and that was Larry Geraghty. I knew, with people like that. Heppenstall was on it, and Geraghty. That I was in the presence of very great Adventists, fine scholars. And, coming from a backwater like Australia, it was, that was the only plus I can think of. I wish we were together at a congress on more positive grounds.
I think that's the great tragedy. And when I was chatting to John Godfrey last night, in the interview I did with him, he said, just, imagine there were so many other creative ways they could have handled it, and it had have ended in a positive kind of scenario. And if that had happened, imagine what Adventism would look like today, where you would be able to go to conventions and have these scholarly discussions and theological forums without fear of recrimination or job loss. I think it would have been an absolutely amazing Adventism to be a part of. And in many ways, because I kind of was born in New Guinea, but very much lived in Kurrambong on and off as Mum and Dad travelled around from New Zealand back to Kurrambong, to Fiji, back to Kurrambong. There was and very much a part of the Avondale College community. I was very lucky because I kind of got to grow up in that kind of Adventism, where we could literally have a Sabbath lunch with relatives that were very conservative, but just know that we loved each other. And like your story of getting together with Athol and over lunch.
I think John Godfrey's absolutely right. There could have been much better ways of doing it than the way that Neil Wilson chose. Somebody did say to me, David Larson, I think it was, who said that Wilson liked the big show, and Glacier View tended to be the big show. I think it could have been done at a smaller level. Some of the things that Des wanted, he wanted to be on a committee looking at some of these issues, and that never happened. Des, of course, got very upset with Parmenter because Parmenter tried to renegotiate the deal. I always felt that was a bit harsh because, the adage of the white goods firm, Bing Lee, they used to have the slogan, "All things are negotiable." Remember that?
Yes.
And I thought, Des had been sent off to America for 2 years. It put the fish into a bigger bowl, and it might tame him a bit. But instead, all that meant was Des worked harder. He was flying all over America, taking meetings and, making a bigger impact, a bigger splash than backing out of the little backwater. The 2 years was up, and it was time to come back. And the deal was he'd come back as the head of the theology department at Avondale. And our friend Parmenter thought, man alive, he hasn't been tamed. He's more wild ex-America than he was before he went there. It didn't work. And so he thought, we've got to renegotiate. Things are negotiable. So he goes first to Castle, the president of PUC, ostensibly Des's employer, I suppose, and said to Castle, would you be prepared to keep Des on your campus as a professor for longer. And, putting the inevitable off, I suppose, because he wasn't going to calm down because he was there for another year or two. But at least it gives Parmenter time to retire, I suppose. And he had to go to Castle to find out if that was something that he would agree to before he went to Des. Go to the easy one first. And if he said, no, we won't want him any longer, then there was no point in going to Des. But he got a yes from Castle. So then he went to Des and said, maybe you need to think about going into the field when you come back instead of going to Avondale. And Des just went ballistic. But the deal was, a deal is a deal. And poor old Palmer's trying to say all deals are negotiable.
Right.
But you've gone behind my back and gone to Castle. Well, he had to go to somebody first.
Yeah.
And he thought the easiest one is going to be Castle. If it's no, then we don't have to do it. Can't go any further. If he says yes, at least we can approach Des with a proposal. I didn't think it was evil. And he went to Des with the proposal, and it blew up in his face.
So you've highlighted a couple of things there where you think Des could have kind of traversed the kind of landscape a bit better. What do you think he actually did wrong at the Glacier View?
Oh boy, I have no idea. I think his position paper was well written, well researched, well argued, in places I think irrefutable. We've seen, I've read some of the efforts to refute. One of the first papers I read at a workers' meeting in Sydney, immediately after Glacier View, was called Rifle Shot or Shotgun. The shotgun is a scatter shot. A rifle is a more direct shot, a single shot. We fired in the October ministry special, we fired a shotgun, a scatter shot, and an awful lot of innocent bystanders got hit. In other words, in their zeal to refute Des, they didn't check. And so even the Bible commentary could be quoted in support of what Des has said. So if you hit Des on that point, then you're hitting the Bible commentary on that point as well. Neufeld and some of these kind of people who had written on things. And so I just tabulated all the ones who were wounded in the scatter fire that they fired, anything as long as it hits Des. So I don't want to fault Des. He didn't set up Glacier View. He couldn't have stopped what happened with the forum. The reason why the forum became such a trigger was because it was recorded, and the little cassettes went around the world like autumn leaves, I can assure you. I was listening to it not that long after it back here in Australia. When Parmenter asked him to try and stop it, he said, I'm not sending them out, which is true. I think it was Brinsmead's crowd that was sending them out. But he could have at least appeared to be cooperative, I suppose, and said, I'll ring Bob and tell him to stop it.
Yeah.
But, these are picadillos. These are nothings.
Yeah, it is what it is. It happened the way it happened.
Yeah. I don't think Des claimed that everything he said and did was beyond reproach. No. He was operating under extreme pressure and attack. I think the amazing thing is that Des never appeared to lose his temper. He always seemed to treat people who didn't deserve it courteously. He seemed to have a high regard for the Standish brothers.
Yeah.
One of whom is lamented.
I think they both are now.
Okay. Well, their attack I think, was unchristian.
Mm.
But Des was always spoke kindly of them, So to some degree, I'm amazed at how well did that. I can think of some picadillos that I think may have been better. Was really outweighed by the fact that how he conducted himself through the whole of it.
Mm. If people that are listening to the podcast, when it comes out down the track, if they listen to episode 3, I did the first 3 episodes of an interview I did with Des not too long before he passed, and he in the 3rd episode, a little way through, I said, just share with us what the gospel means to you. And he just did it in the space of about 20 minutes, maybe 15, 20 minutes. And Jill was in the background. And when he finished, it was like just goosebumps. We were quiet, and I thought, wow, this guy's here in the very twilight of his life, but he's lived this gospel, and the fruits of his love for Christ and the gospel were born, and were shining brightly even at that late stage in his life.
Yeah.
And I think
well, Des was. I think Des would have died the way he lived, by faith. And certainly Arthur Patrick did. I mean, I remember visiting Arthur Patrick just before he died. He was asleep, and I sat in the chair next to him, reading a book, and he woke up and saw that I was reading a book. He said, "What book are you reading?" I said, "Oh, it's a history of the American Civil War." "Oh, why are you reading that?" I said, "Because we've just seen the film Abraham Lincoln." And I said there were spots in it where I missed the point because I just didn't have the background. And so I'm reading the background, having now seen the film. And he says, "Oh, Joan and I were going to see that." He says, "Was it good?" I said, "It was excellent." And, here he is knowing that he's going to die, and he knew he's going to die soon, but he's chatting and interested in one other thing. And then he said to me, "Let us, what are you working on?" I said, "I'm working on John's Gospel at the moment. I wrote a manuscript, and nobody wants to publish it, but I wrote a manuscript." And he said, "Let's walk together through the chapters of John." And so here he is lying in his, palliative care bed, really. And we walked through together, chapter by chapter, the 21 chapters of John's Gospel. And, the impression that had on me, that Arthur was going to die the way he lived, loving the Lord, full of faith.
What kind of things would you like to leave with people, thoughts, before we sign off? What kind of hope can you offer for young people that are coming up? What kind of things would you like to leave with us?
I think the young people give us the hope. When I came back from Glacier View and took a forum here at college and some other workers' meetings and that, the thing that the young people at college wanted to know was Des treated fairly, and was love at the center of it all. That's what they wanted to know, was love at the center of it all. And so I think our young people have got a greater sense of the love of God than most of us had at their age. So I think that they are our hope for sure. I would probably say something like this, and if you had to ask me that question, I could have thought about it, but this is just coming off the cuff. At the moment, there's a bit of tension between Australia and China because Australia feels it's important that we trace the cause of how we handle this virus once it jumped across from the animal kingdom into human and has caused a worldwide anguish, which is far from finished. We're going to hit 5 million infections very soon, and probably, what is it, about 300,000 deceased. And as the mayor of New York keeps reminding us, even though the numbers are going down, every one of these represents a family, loved one, grandchildren, etc. Every death is a tragedy, many of them unnecessary. So we want to do this retracing the steps to find out how it did that jump, where it did the jump, how it could have been better handled, how it went from China very quickly to Hong Kong and through the world. Can we learn? Let's review. Let's do a review. I would say, let us, if we're going to review Glacier View, let us do a review and ask ourselves, not to try and say this is the right view and this is the wrong view, but how did it, and which China thinks everybody's going to try and blame China, which USA seems to be trying to do, but that's Trump. And although it ill behoves me to comment on somebody else's leader, we have to discount some of what's happening in America by their leader. But we can learn from that lesson, or the attempt to learn from that lesson of this coronavirus, or SARS-2 or whatever, COVID-19. How did it get such a hold? How did it move so quickly? Where did it originate? Not to blame somebody, but so we can all learn from it and try and prevent it happening again. Let us review Glacier View to see how we can do it better. If such a thing arises again, and it will, as long as we keep hanging on to October 22, 1844, Jesus moving from this work to that work, even if we qualify it by not calling it rooms or compartments, but calling it phases, you've still got Jesus doing something post 1844 in the heavenly sanctuary that he wasn't doing prior to 1844. Let us review when that rises again. How are we going to handle it? What are we going to focus on? Will we lose Christ? Will it be like 1888, that shemozzle, where Ellen White counseled us to need to go back to the school of Christ and learn of him and then come back and talk about things? Let's get the perspective of what Christianity is all about. Like I learned in Daniel Revelation class and shared with my former business partner, and he dropped the topic forever, and that the center is Christ and him crucified, and the love and mercy of God that is revealed in sparing not his son, but giving him up for us all. I'm crucified with Christ, Paul said. I no longer live, and the life you can see me living in the flesh, I live by faith in the Son of God, who loved me and gave himself for me. My wife asked me yesterday, if I had one text of the Bible, which text would it be? Well, I have a number of favorites. Ephesians 4:32 and its parallel in Colossians 3:13 are favorites. But in the end, I said Galatians 2:20. And she said to me, why Galatians 2:20? I said, because the usual answer, John 3:16, is the world. God so loved the world. And that is rather impersonal. But Galatians 2:20 is who loved me and gave himself for me. And that just personalizes it. And so we need, armed with those kinds of texts. The other favorite text, Ephesians 4:32, be ye kind one to another, tender-hearted, forgiving one another as God, for Christ's sake, has forgiven you. So we need to approach these kind of tensions with that kind of love, care, and to be able to listen as well as to speak. That's hard for me. I'm paid to talk, and I do it very readily. But we need to listen to each other. I mean, maybe the concerned brethren aren't 100% wrong. You know, they want us to take seriously our life in Christ. I think they're wrong because they move towards perfectionism. But their practical point is that the perfectionist is, if we are told we cannot get victory over all sin, then we won't try. That's what they say. We won't try. If we can't believe it's achievable, we won't try. I don't try to run the 4-minute mile because I know it's not achievable for me. I do well to walk the 6-minute 100 yards or meters. But they've missed the point, haven't they? The love of Christ constrains me, 2 Corinthians 5:14. That's why we continue, not because we think it's achievable. I'm trying to be the best husband I can to a beautiful wife. Am I perfect? Well, go and ask her. I don't want to skite. Go and ask her. And she will almost certainly, he's not a bad bloke, but he ain't perfect. I'm trying to be the best grandfather I can be for beautiful grandchildren, a gift from God in the old age. Grandchildren are the plus of old age, plus $2.50 on the train. But am I perfect? No. So what keeps me trying to be those things? I love my grandchildren. I love my wife. That's why. The love of Christ constrains us. That's why we try and do the impossible, to always please him. But when we don't please him, we need to confess it, but not kill ourselves over it. So it seems to me. So the message I would give to young people would be, focus your life on Christ. Des Ford used to say, how to overcome your faults? The expulsive power of a greater, he would rattle this off without a hesitation. Of a greater affection. The expulsive power of a greater affection. Put Christ first in your life. Love him totally and committed to him. And that the expulsive power of a greater affection. And live your life in Christ. And when you come to a conflict, which will happen for sure sooner or later, deal with it in a way that is creative, that is Christian, and is seeking reconciliation. You know, leave your gift at the altar and go and try and make it right with your brother. While you're on the way, before you even come into judgment, try and settle out of court. Are some of the parables Jesus gives. To solve problems as early as we can and love one another. This is the great commandment, isn't it? To love one another as I have loved you. Wash one another's feet. Play the servant role to the other, the slave role to the other. For Jesus did that and left us an example. So I would tell the young people to love one another. And love in the New Testament is an active noun. It's how you treat the other, not just an emotion in the heart. And love the neighbor as though you were loving yourself. And neighbor here doesn't just mean somebody who lives next door. It means everyone you meet. Try and treat them with the love of God. And if you say, boy, that's a big ask, it is. But it is the only way. It is the only way. Love is the only way.
Yeah.
an act of love for the other, a doing, not just a feeling, a doing.
Love is a verb.
If love is a verb, says beautifully what I'm trying to say. I should interview you.
It'd be a short interview.
I'm sure it wouldn't. You could explain to the audience what a pen, what was it?
The pentatonic scale.
The pentatonic scale.
I want to get my PhD in the pentatonic scale.
Yes, yes.
Hey,
My wife says she would like to have a PhD, and I said, why? And she said, so that people will respect me. And I said, oh my giddy aunt. I said, don't respect PhDs. I said, that's just people who've focused for 4 years of their life on so focused that they end up knowing everything about nothing. Yeah. They focus down until they know everything about nothing.
yeah.
So PhDs are a joke. No, I said, it's a person. You respect a person, not a doctorate.
Norm, thank you very much for taking this time for us. It is
And
great.
All the best, Peter, and all the best with your PhD. But
on the 5 main notes.
We won't respect you anymore, but nor will we respect you any less.
The conversation will be ongoing in the comments.
Have we got anybody still listening to us? Because we've been talking here. It seems to be
over 30 people have hung around the whole time.
Oh, God bless them.
So we've had a great chat, and it feels like we've just scratched the surface.
They could have read half the books on the shelf here, couldn't they? In that time. Let me see. What can I see that was recommended?
And I noticed that you're not really a Facebook kind of person, but if you change your mind, jump into Liz's account and join SDAQ&A and come and wade into some of the comments. I'm looking to my right here. I've finally gotten organised and a little bit more technical, and I can see many comments that people have put there. So you might want to respond, or you might not want to.
My wife has a Facebook account, but I think she just receives them, and she might do a comment or a thumbs up, like. And sometimes she'll say, oh, have a look at this, and I'll read on Facebook. But no, I've never joined. And my son is in IT, and he refuses to have anything to do with Facebook.
Wow.
He reckons they are a scurrilous firm. He said, how do you think, ages ago when he warned me, don't join Facebook, Dad. He said, how do you think they make money? I said, I have no idea. He said, they sell your name.
They sell your information.
They sell their database to anybody who will buy it. And he said, if you don't cherish your privacy, then you have joined Facebook.
Yeah,
that's how they make their money. And I think he's paranoid, mind you. But
yeah, I've got nothing to hide, so I don't care. What are they going to do? Oh, he likes to buy guitars. And look, well, we're going to leave it there. But you're welcome to join in with Liz and read some of the comments and get involved or not. Just let it go out there.
That'll be discouraging, I'm sure.
It'll hover out there for a bit longer.
You were going to talk about my wife's long stitch or whatever it is on the wall behind me.
Oh, yes, behind you.
Yes.
Let's close with a little, because it was quite relevant in many ways to the topic, and it's just been hovering there in the background.
All those who are still there, we'll give you the question. What biblical story, New Testament biblical story, so we'll narrow it down a bit, is represented by this stitching?
Well, it's very hard to see the stitching in the video.
I can see it very clear on mine.
There's 10 subjects.
Yeah, you can't see all 10 of them. I can only see 8 of them. But there are 2 more.
I can see 10.
Oh, you can see the 10. Yeah. I can see it very clearly, but only 8 of them. And it is the 10 maidens with their lamps, a somewhat modern version. They're not terracotta lamps, and they're not olive oil with a bit of a wick either. They are more Swedish, 18th century lamps, I think, and Swedish beauties as well, not Jewish. And one of them has 10 of them have their lamps lit, and 10 have gone out. So it's that wonderful, which is a big parable, of course, in our history. The way we
5 were ready.
Behold, the bridegroom cometh.
5 were ready for the judgment, and 5 weren't.
Yeah, but more than that, behold, the bridegroom cometh was a catch cry of particularly the 7th month movement. In a way, to understand 1844, you need to know denominational history.
Yeah.
You need to understand what the bridegroom cometh, why they got excited about that, what it meant, how they reinterpreted it. How did they get October 22? Because Miller just had the 21st of March to the 21st of March 44, so 43, the spring of northern spring of March 21, 43.
Wasn't it actually in the Day of Atonement that year was actually September 27, wasn't it? Not October 22.
Oh, I don't know, but Miller never preached that.
No.
He didn't come on board until later. That was a guy called S.S. Snow got that going and wrote up the True Midnight Cry. And you can get that online. And he argued from the autumn feasts. And so he got that date of the 22nd using the Karaite Jewish calendar. But I understand that even the Karaite Jewish calendar doesn't actually give you October 22. No. But be that as it may, we're starting up again, aren't we?
Do you know what? SDAQ&A is not going away. We're not going to we've already done about 21 episodes, and this is just a little series that is focusing on Glacier View. So as soon as this series is finished, I want to be chatting to you again, because I think we could do a couple of episodes just on that topic.
Yeah, well, maybe John's Gospel, because I can't get it published.
Yeah, well, SDAQ&A could be your publisher.
Yes, that's a thought, isn't it? That's a thought. They're very modern. And I hope also you've told Peter, I hope you've told them that Zoom is something fairly new on the Australian horizon, as far as I know. The coronavirus has made
I know
Zoom absolutely Zoom.
I wish I'd bought Zoom shares 3 months ago.
Oh, okay.
Before Christmas.
Yeah. Well, the thing I'm proud of is that I managed to get onto it so readily and easily. You didn't say any words of
I was
how proud you were.
I was impressed. That I sent you a link, and I was expecting a phone call with you saying, I cannot, what's that button? I can't get on. And literally up you popped on the screen.
I expected that too. But no, I read the text and understood it and hit the right buttons. And of course, I'm accustomed to using a mouse on my ancient laptop. And I had to keep remembering, Joan Patrick has just sent a hello, lovely ladies. No, that's not for me.
She sent that to Liz. We're going to pause it there.
Yeah.
I absolutely love chatting with you. And I know, judging from a few comments, I can see people have really valued your contribution. And I'm hoping that for years to come, people can delve into these podcasts and analyze them to death and come up with all sorts of conclusions.
You're a good man doing it. And those poor people out in America.
Hopefully it's a valuable resource.
What time was it in the States when we started? We started at 2 p.m. here.
I don't know. And when I spoke to Bill the other day, it was 11:30 here and about 6:30 there at night. 11:30 a.m. and 6:30 p.m.
Yeah, and probably a different day.
The day before.
Yeah. Yeah. Well,
But on this coming Monday, I think,
forgive us, you people in the USA.
which yeah,
We just
yes,
talked on and on and on.
with on Monday or Tuesday, I'm having a very interesting interview as part of this series with a guy called Ken Samples, who was Walter Ray's kind of protege. And
Oh,
we're chatting. So if you, it'll be I think 10:30. I haven't announced this anywhere yet. This is hot off the press. It'll be Monday or Tuesday, 10:30 a.m. A chat with this guy Ken Sampler, who
send
was
me an email. Send me an
yeah,
email.
Not Walter Ray, Walter Martin.
Oh, Walter Martin.
Walter Martin. I said Walter Ray by mistake. Walter
You did
Martin.
say Walter Ray.
Yeah.
There is a Walter Ray.
Yes, of
And
course.
that
But
would have been an interesting conversation too,
that's
mate.
yeah. I think we're going to have about 5 podcasts by the end of the year with just you and me chatting. We could start a new podcast.
Maybe you need to record it and edit it down
I
for the
am. I
for the
am.
for the sake of our poor American brethren.
There'll be a shorter version.
Yes.
Okay, I'm going to
Okay.
go and feed the
Now,
dog.
where do I hit to leave the meeting?
I'll hit the button. Just hang on a second. We say farewell to everybody. Thank you.
And
And
God bless you all. And you did well to stay with it to the end. 82-year-old become garrulous old men. The taciturn is not a word that we ever think of. Prolix is more like it. If you don't know what they mean, look up your dictionary. Prolix rather than taciturn.
See you later, Norm.
If there are any Swedes there, any Swedes out there, hej då, lycka till och Gud välsigne dig.
See you later, Norm.
Okay, bye.